Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. I hope you had a restful weekend because I don't know when it officially begins, but I think it might be today. I think today it all officially begins. Here's the plan for the week. Tomorrow's going to be all debate prep. Of course, we're going to play the debate here on the 1st, Tuesday night. I'm sure Wednesday is going to be all post-debate. If Trump does well, the media will rapidly, immediately switch right over to the Supreme Court battle to change topics. If Biden does well, and by does well, I mean stays standing for 90 minutes. That's the bar. That's the expectation level for Biden. Remember Biden at his DNC speech? Everyone was like, oh, it's the greatest speech in the whole world because he just stood and read a prompter for 20 minutes or whatever. So the bar is real low for Biden. So if Biden stands up for 90 minutes, then the media is going to focus on the debate all week long. So we'll see how that goes. So I'm looking at the week ahead. I'm thinking, okay, well, we got today, right? We got a nice calm before the storm Monday. Could talk about some things, kind of ease into the week. And then it was the last night, the New York Times released Trump's tax returns. And now we are just inundated with massive amounts of financial illiteracy. We're going to talk a lot more about this on my radio show this afternoon, but the very short of Trump's tax returns. If you pay more in federal taxes than you legally need to, then you're a fool. And everyone knows this. Who has an accountant who says, hey, if you deduct this and deduct that and move this over here, then you can keep $5,000 more for yourself? Who says, nah, you know what? The IRS could really use that money more than me. In fact, you know what? Give them the 5, throw in another 2. Give them a little extra on top for the federal government. They always use it so wisely to help people. No one's ever done that ever. So what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to hold Donald Trump to that standard for the last 20 years of his existence? Give me a break. Joe Biden doesn't even do that. We'll talk more about it on the radio. But Joe Biden moved money into an S corp instead of this other thing, so he didn't have to pay Social Security taxes. Everyone does. It's so stupid. And we even know, this was even so weird about the story. It's not even a story. Remember back in 2016, Hillary brought this up at the debate, that you moved something around for some casino loss or whatever. And Trump's like, yeah, that makes me smart. This isn't even a story. There's a massive difference between tax avoidance, which we all do, and tax evasion, which Trump didn't do. And the New York Times had this offhand, this is a long article. They had this offhand kind of throwaway line of, and also the tax returns do not reveal any previous unreported connections to Russia. You're like, oh, you mean the whole last 4 years? Left's been hyperventilating about that for 4 years. And then it also confirmed that Trump was under audit, which Trump said he was, and the left didn't believe him for that. And the media, they're writing the headlines of, how Trump paid only $750 in federal taxes in 2017, which is the first year he was president. But they don't write anything about the $38 million he paid in taxes in 2015, which would be a very different story. So they're being selective with what they share, of course. Jesse Kelly had a great tweet the other day, as he always does. He says, it's hilarious how mad Democrats are about Trump not paying taxes. That's the only form of patriotism they like, is paying taxes. And Biden said as much, as he was, A, writing the tax code. He's been there for 47 years, and taking advantage of the tax code that he wrote, and B, literally doing it, literally moving money into an S corp to avoid paying, right? Also worth noting that whoever leaked these documents is guilty of many felonies. So we'll see if anyone's ultimately held accountable for releasing them. There's one more thing I was going to say about Biden. Oh, I'm less concerned with the millionaire businessman who's paying less in taxes after he became president. I'm much more concerned about the senator who makes $150,000 a year and somehow has a net worth of $9 million. That's the guy I have a few more questions about. And that would be Joe Biden. So in the end, this isn't going to move the needle at all. Again, it's not even news. It was known back in 2016. I guess we just have proof of it all. But It's not going to move the needle in any way whatsoever. Trump's going to say in the debate on Tuesday, of course he didn't pay more in taxes than he needed to, and that's it. I bring it up here because we had just been 5 minutes on it. We had 36 days, right? News is going to be coming out of a fire hose for the next 36 days. And it's by design, it's going to be impossible to talk about it all and to make sense of it all. And that is, though, why I want to take this time here on this calm before the storm to talk about Breonna Taylor. A little bit specifically, but also about what this whole story represents and add it to the list. Because it's all about choose your own adventure. So we've said for years, this is a battle for reality. Everything's a battle for reality. What's real, what's not. It's not even truth. It's a battle for truth always. But right now it's even a battle for reality. It's just you can believe whatever you want. It's a choose your own adventure book. I know someone who is still upset that police busted down the wrong door and killed Breonna Taylor. And I'm thinking geez, what's a person's responsibility to reach out to a friend and say, listen, that's not what happened. But let me get to that. All these stories have been wrong. All of them. Starting with Michael Brown. Hands up, don't shoot. Never happened. Hands up, don't shoot. Never happened. George Floyd had a lethal dose of fentanyl in his system, and those officers are probably not going to be charged with any crimes either. Good night for when that happens. Jacob Blake, we were told, did that happen? Did you see that or no? Was it on the TV? For some reason, my pen just started to randomly roll, and I caught it. That was awesome. No, I don't think the banner was in the way. I don't think anyone saw. Jacob Blake, we were told, was a good Samaritan. He was merely breaking up a fight. And it turns out he was a rapist back at his victim's house who called 911, and the police officers shot him because they thought he was kidnapping these children. They thought he was kidnapping them. Because that was the whole thing. It was he's breaking up a fight, and they shot him in front of his children. They thought he was kidnapping these kids. All of them. The root of all these are lies. And it's the same with Breonna Taylor. I heard for months and months and months, this happened on March 13th. Months and months and months, all we heard about is how she was an innocent woman sleeping in her bed. Police performed a no-knock raid on the wrong house. And they busted in and they shot and killed a sleeping woman. An unarmed sleeping woman in her sleep. That was the narrative that people still believe. Again, no-knock raid, wrong house, killed a sleeping woman in cold blood. The truth is so much different than that. It's so much different than everything's gonna be like this. From this point forward, for the next 36 plus days, everything's gonna be like that. I'll give you a quick thing about Ohio, real quick, quick sidebar. Ohio's gonna release their election results for any ballots received prior to election night and then people who vote on election night. Ohio state law, and every state's a little different, can accept ballots for the next 10 days that were postmarked before election night, or I guess on election night. So 10 days. And they're not gonna release any updates for the next 10 days after this. Okay, so if it's close on election night, we're not gonna know any update about Ohio until November 13th. So what's gonna happen in those next 10 days? Whatever you want. Who won Ohio? It's whatever you want. It's whatever you want. Choose your own adventure. Live in whatever world you want. Trump won, Biden won, it's whatever you want. I don't know how that works. I don't know how we live in that world. This pen doesn't even work, it's broken. This is twice, sorry, it's my last sidebar. Twice in my life, I've finished the whole pen. Do you see that? I've used the entire, as opposed to losing them. Pretty impressive. So what happened with Breonna Taylor? What's the truth? Police were looking for Breonna Taylor. It wasn't the wrong house. That's who they were looking for. Her name was on the warrant. That's who they were looking for. Her boyfriend shot at police first. Police returned fire. She wasn't in her bed. I mean, she was sleeping because it was past midnight. At a point, she was sleeping, but at this point, she was standing in the hallway. And the police officers were justified in their return fire because they were fired upon first. They were protecting themselves. And it wasn't a no-knock. They knocked. Every single key detail of the story is wrong. This is the Attorney General of Kentucky who's black, and there's this new line I've heard from these black activists who say, he's skin folk, but not kinfolk. The truth is now before us. The facts have been examined and a grand jury comprised of peers and fellow citizens has made a decision. Our reaction to the truth today says what kind of society we want to be. Do we really want the truth, or do we want a truth that fits our narrative? Do we want the facts, or are we content to blindly accept our own version of events? Yes is the answer. Yes, people are content to blindly accept our own version of events. And we're just going to see it on steroids for the next 30 days. So coming up in the next segment, I want to go into a little more detail of why people are falling for this. But again, I just want to be clear. The narrative was innocent woman, wrong house, sleeping in her bed. Police secretly sneak in, no knock warrant, and they kill her. The truth was she was under investigation. Police did knock. The boyfriend fired at police first. It's a tragic accident. It's a tragic accident, assuming, and I have no reason to believe this isn't true, but assuming that the boyfriend thought it was her ex-boyfriend trying to break in. So he says he shot because they thought it was the ex-boyfriend, who we're going to talk about in a minute. Assuming that's true, and I could see how one would think that necessarily, assuming they didn't hear that it was the police, then it's a horrible, tragic accident, a terrible story. But to suggest that it's anything racist like that, it's just not true. And to suggest that it could happen to you too is absurd as well. The real person who people need to know in this story is not Breonna Taylor. It's Jamarcus Glover. He was the main target of the drug probe that wrapped Breonna up in it. So I want to take a minute and talk about him next, and then the whole thing will make way more sense. But please, because I know this whole Breonna Taylor thing is old news, but do you see the bigger picture here? The big picture about how, I don't know how we survive in a society where we're just living in totally different planets. And I don't know what's going to happen in 36 days when that's the reality. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I just want to focus a little more on Breonna Taylor, just again as a big picture example of how we can just make up whatever we want and go with it, and that's really dangerous. I don't know how that's going to, it can't possibly work for the next 36 days until the election. Think about how we just got a couple pictures here of the riots and stuff, but think of the damage that's come, not even property damage, but just relationships broken up, relationships hurt over lies. Maybe lies is a strong word, but misconceptions, to say the least, about what really happened and what the full story is. Let's do the quick of it here. Jamarcus Glover. Jamarcus Glover is the guy we really need to be aware of. 2008, he was sentenced. And here's the thing with, I think we have a picture of him. So we can do it, and this is what the media can do. The media can play, every time you see Jamarcus Glover, it's going to be a picture of him smiling with his ex-girlfriend, Breonna Taylor. We could also play the picture of him looking like a total thug on the other extreme. I think that's his mugshot, right? It's like a neutral picture. But just so you know how media bias can work, it's all the time. So that's Jamarcus Glover. 2008, he was sentenced to 17 years in prison in Mississippi for selling cocaine. He served less than 6, moved up to Louisville, was arrested again in 2014, and began dating Breonna Taylor in 2016. What the heck? One shouldn't date a twice convicted drug dealer. Now, Slater, you're being very judgmental. Maybe he reformed himself, okay? So this would have been 2 years after his second drug conviction. I don't know how you get arrested and go to you're sentenced to 17 years, you serve less than 6, you get arrested again and you're out right away. I don't know how that works. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Slater, maybe he reformed himself, right? And Breonna fell in love with a new man. She knew that he was arrested twice, at least twice, for drug offenses, but now he's been clean and he's on the straight and narrow. So who are you to say that this was a mistake to start dating Jamarcus Glover? December, he asked her a favor, to rent a car in her name so he could borrow it. So she did. The next day, police found the car with a guy slumped over the steering wheel, shot 8 times, drugs in the car, and her rental contract in the passenger seat. Jamarcus gave the keys to a man he knew as Rambo, who said he had to go run an errand. Police concluded that she didn't know anything about it all and was just, wrapped up in it. But they did question how involved she was with Jamarcus's drug dealings. And there was a female investigator who asked, she was at her apartment with both of them, and the female investigator asked if, are you involved with this? And they both sort of mumbled, and the investigator said, so how are you getting all these little fine things you've got on? So the point of bringing this up is, you should get away from the guy, probably the twice convicted drug dealer, right? But you should definitely get away from the guy after he takes a rental car in your name, gives it to someone else who gets riddled with bullets, dragging you into a murder case. But she didn't. Stayed with him. He kept posting his bail. He called her 48 times from jail. She knew what she was involved in. Did she want to get out of it? Probably. And nothing is a reason to get shot by police officers, right? Everyone deserves a proper trial and all that, sure. But the problem with, and this is why the left will not allow anyone to have this kind of conversation, because you're blaming the victim, right? The left is so quick to blame. Oh, you can't blame the victim. You're blaming the victim. You're blaming the victim. No. The problem with making her out to be a person without any agency at all is it makes it seem like anyone, any black person, could also be randomly killed by police at any time. I mean, if you don't add a lick of agency to her life and the decisions she made, then you're telling people that you too could just be sleeping in your bed and a police officer comes in and murders you. And that's not true at all. So we're not going to go over all the evidence here because we got stuff to do, but just know that police saw Glover walk to her apartment, pick up packages, and then return to a known drug house that he was running 6 times in 1 month. This was in the month of January. Another thing you don't hear anyone talk about is police performed 3 other no-knock raids at the same time that they did the raid on Breonna's house. And it was all connected to the Jamarcus Glover case. They got Jamarcus Glover. And in all those 3 other no-knock raids, there were no shots fired at all. And they found drugs and guns and evidence that they were trying to get rid of drugs like stuff down the toilet and stuff like that. 3 other no-knock raids that night, and they all went perfectly. Jamarcus that night from jail called another girl and said Breonna had $8,000 and she'd been, quote, handling all my money. Earlier in the year, another time that Jamarcus was arrested, he called Breonna from jail, told her to get in contact with another guy in order to get his bail money. And Breonna said that this person was, quote, already at the trap, which is a house that's used for drug trafficking. I think we have a picture of one of the, I believe it's 3 or 4 houses that Jamarcus was using on this one block. They were all right next to each other on Elliott Avenue in Louisville there. And there's a whole backstory there, which we don't have time to get into. But so she's posted bail for Jamarcus before, already at the trap. Like she knew about all this. She had connections to all this. Now, I'm not saying she was guilty of whatever, or that she's a terrible person. Again, I'm not saying that she's, that proper for her to be killed without trial, any of that stuff. Don't put those words in my mouth. But it's not true that she was a random person that police accidentally busted in her door. And it's not true that it was racist in any way whatsoever. And it's not true that she had nothing to do with this. Her attorney said that Breonna was living her best life. Bailing out, handling money, and delivering her packages with or for drug dealers, living her best life. This is a line from the New York Times. Ms. Taylor attended college, trained as an EMT, and hoped to become a nurse. That's another thing you hear that she's like a first responder. But along the way, she developed a years-long relationship with a twice-convicted drug dealer whose trail led the police to her door that fateful night. She never graduated college, and she quit her job as an EMT. So based on all this, I think she was a good girl at heart, but if anything, the system let her down The justice system let her down, not with the no-knock raid and all that. The justice system let her down by letting this Glover guy out of prison so that she could even get mixed up with him in the first place. Should have been, he was sentenced to 17 years. He should still be in jail in Mississippi. But he kept getting arrested and arrested and arrested and let out and let out and let out. So the justice system let Breonna down, not to mention all the other victims of Jamarcus's dealings. And then, of course, broken education system and a broken culture and the choices that her dad made when he murdered someone when she was 6 years old. So it's everything that comes from that brokenness. The whole thing broke down. Now, there were two specific mistakes made that night as well. The police thought that Breonna was alone. They did not know that she had a boyfriend. They didn't know that there was a boyfriend with her. They thought that Jamarcus was her only male interest. So they didn't think there was someone else inside the house. Certainly someone who was going to shoot them. And then the other mistake, which is unexplained so far, I hope maybe we get an answer on this one day, is that an ambulance is supposed to be nearby whenever they do these raids. And they waved it off. There was an ambulance, but then they told it to leave for some reason. Don't know why, but maybe that could have saved her life. And I'll just say this again. There were 3 other raids that night that were completed properly. They got the drugs, they got the people. It's just this one that did not go according to plan. If police were intent on randomly killing black people, don't you think they would have shot and killed the drug dealers? Why would they have shot and killed Breonna? Who they knew was lower level, right? That's why it wasn't a no-knock raid. Right? But why wouldn't they have shot Jamarcus Glover if they were racist cops out there just trying to randomly kill people? I'll end with Abigail Schreier, Wall Street Journal. She said, maybe, and I'm just spitballing here, maybe the people who sat on the grand jury and heard all the evidence know more than people who watched CNN for 20 minutes and got angry. There's going to be a lot of getting angry coming up here. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, to sort of wrap up the Breonna Taylor story, but then also to move in some bigger picture stuff, because this Breonna Taylor story and all these are very symbolic of what's happening in our country in many different ways. I want to go to Diana Muller, who is a retired Tulsa police officer, and she's the founder of the DC Project, which is something we're definitely going to get to in a second. Ms. Muller, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me this morning.
Good to talk to you. I should say retired police officer in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I got 2 law enforcement questions for you real quick. Can we talk about no-knock warrants for a minute here? What's your take on them? How does one get them? Why would police officers get them, et cetera?
Okay. So no-knock warrants are used in very limited situations. And as I want to say this, as a police officer and a citizen that advocates for the Second Amendment, this whole Breonna Taylor thing has really captured my attention. Because we have a police officer getting shot in the leg, and then we have a citizen that's being shot and killed in her own home by a lawfully, the boyfriend had a lawful firearm and he wasn't a convict by any means. So, and then we have a no-knock warrant. So yeah, let's talk about no-knock warrants. And I love the fact that Rand Paul has actually brought up some legislation to look at those, and I think that's totally appropriate. Now, why do we use no-knock warrants? We use no-knock warrants because of a couple of reasons, really. If we think that the evidence is going to be destroyed, or there's some threat of there's some existential threat that's more than search warrants. All search warrants are very dangerous. But, and usually in my experience in the Tulsa Police Department, our SOT, our SWAT guys, usually did the no-knock warrants. So it's really kind of a rare thing. And yeah, let's take a look at those, because I certainly don't want police officers getting shot, and I certainly don't want citizens being, losing their life trying to defend their home.
I get the reason for them, and I totally understand the reason against them too. I think it's noteworthy, though, as we talked about in the last segment, that there were 3 other no-knock raids related to Jamarcus Glover that night, and they all went perfectly according to plan, and they got no shots were fired, and they got the drugs that they were looking for, and all that, right? So,
well, I think the perception about Miss Taylor's activity. I mean, I did read the search warrant. And her name was listed on the search warrant. Her address was listed on the search warrant. It's not like the police were there and got the wrong address, or that the guy that they were looking for wasn't there. I mean, she was involved in criminal activity, and that it's a tragedy. It's an unfortunate incident that has occurred, and let's definitely look at it and investigate it. I'm not saying that all police actions should be just swept under the carpet. If they've done something wrong, let's take a look at it. And obviously, one of the guys, one of the officers was charged, or yes, they were charged by the grand jury. So if you're calling for justice, justice means that you have to appreciate due process. And if you want it for yourself, you should probably want it for everybody. And that's going to be police officers included. So facts matter.
Wow. Yeah, well, we've gone from, I think, justice to revenge, which is a very different thing. I feel like that's where we are. But that brings us to the grand jury that you mentioned. So I feel like everyone just throws around this term grand jury like we all know exactly what that is. What is a grand jury?
Well, a grand jury is not used a lot either. So basically, when you get arrested, the booking sheet is going to go to the prosecutor's office, and the prosecutor and their team, a team of prosecutors, may decide what they want to file, what kind of charges they want to file, if they want to offer any kind of deals, plea deals. They're managing their cases. And in high-profile things like this, and again, this is a rarity, but in high-profile things like this, they might put it to the grand jury. And a grand jury is actually better because several reasons. First of all, it's many more people of your peers. It's kind of like a jury. So these are your peers, your people from your community that are sitting there listening to the evidence to even charge you. This is not a conviction. This is just whether do we want to file charges, and what charges do we want to file. So I feel like grand juries are great. They're done in secrecy, and you might think that transparency is always good, but sometimes transparency is not. In this case, I believe that the secrecy of the grand jury works to the benefit of the citizens, the suspects, if I feel like I can come in and tell a true story and nobody is going to know who I am, they're not going to retaliate against me, then I might be a little bit more forthcoming about what happened. So
the grand jury is used instead of leaving it up to the prosecutor's office's discretion. So I guess I want to make sure I get this right. So if the prosecutor decided not to press charges, let's say, not to press charges on the officers, then there could be this big outrage of, oh, you guys are just biased towards cops, and of course you're going to protect your own and all that. So the grand jury kind of takes it out of the prosecutor's office hands and puts it into the peers' hands. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think
that's good. How many people do we know?
There's like 22, 23. I don't know the exact number, and I don't know if it fluctuates, but it's considerable.
Okay. And how many people need to agree to a charge or not?
I don't know. I don't know if I doubt it's unanimous. It may just be 40. I'm not sure.
So the fact that all those police officers got no charges except for that one officer with a pretty low wanton endangerment, that's pretty telling that they saw all the evidence and only went with that, right?
Well, and that's my concern with all of this public scrutiny about these cases. I mean, we don't know the facts. And look at what happened. Our country is on fire and so divided over George Floyd. And what we saw was the 9-minute, what we felt like was a horrible incident. But then you back it up 10, 15 minutes before that, and you realize that, because I have had some very, very strong conversations with people that are in the Second Amendment advocacy. One is Mr. Maj Toure. He's amazing. He's out of Philly. He has Black Guns Matter, and he takes the Second Amendment back into the Black community, the urban communities, and lets them know how to exercise their Second Amendments. Great program. Take a look at it. But he is. I'm from the law enforcement side, and he is not from the law enforcement side. He is from the criminal side, and he'll tell you that. But he sees things through that lens, and I see things through the law enforcement lens. So you can imagine that our conversations are pretty heated. And after the whole George Floyd thing, we had a very heated conversation. And it's very difficult for me to say you don't know everything. So please, just take a moment to let the investigation play out. And that's the problem with what we're seeing across America these days is that people are seeing little bits of things and they don't wait for the evidence. They don't wait for a full investigation, and they go out and they protest, which is increasingly becoming a riot and doing all the looting, the burning, and the death and destruction that comes along with that. So that's my concern. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I mean, and we don't. I mean, this happened back in March, the Breonna Taylor, and people don't have patience for this. People want to know immediately, and that's just not reality. If your desire is justice and not revenge, let me ask you this big picture question, Diana. Would you want your kids or loved ones to become a police officer today?
Oh man, that's a tough question. I'm split. I mean, I know that if good people don't continue to serve their communities, that we're only going to end up with the bad ones. So I want good people to stay. I want to encourage them to stay through this. But it's just, it's crazy and it's dangerous. And if there's anybody getting hunted and murdered, it's police officers. It's not Black men at the hands of police officers. So I would stand toe to toe and disagree with anybody on that.
We got about 2 minutes. Let me jump to DC Project.
Okay.
And every state's different, so it's tough to have this conversation because every state has different laws. But if you can just speak big picture, everyone should own a gun who feels that they can handle it properly, and everyone should be trained properly to handle it properly. But I'm worried that in today's day and age, let's say I'm legally carrying a gun in my car and I get surrounded by a mob and my kids are in the car and I use this gun, I'm afraid I'm going to jail for a very long time. How can one be sure that if they were to use their firearm, even for self-defense or only for self-defense, that they're not the ones who are going to be in big trouble because of it?
I don't think that there is a guarantee there. I think that you're going to have to do the right thing and see how it plays out. And that's what I plan on doing. I know that, especially with my training, I feel comfortable. Well, let me back up. The DC Project is Women for Gun Rights. So what we have is women who feel like education, not legislation, is actually the key to safety and protecting ourselves and our families and our homes. So we definitely advocate the education piece. And we would our solutions would be to put hunter ed or some sort of firearms education back in schools. I mean, we have to take our schools back where all of this hate and discontent is coming from our school system. So I would encourage your people to not only get out and vote, but consider running for office. Pay attention. I mean, this has really awakened to me over the past 5 years of getting into advocacy for gun rights. I pay attention a lot more than I used to. So I don't know if it's just part of growing up or if I just got a bug somehow. But yeah, it's education, not legislation. Gun safety.
I think that's totally right. And I love doing it from younger and younger age, right? But if kids were properly taught how to use a firearm and to respect a firearm, the whole conversation in our country would be totally different regarding guns, right? I mean, I feel like so much of the anti-gun thing just comes from pure ignorance. People have never fired a gun.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Diana Muller, retired Tulsa police officer, and DC Project. What's the website for DC Project?
DCproject.info.
Piece of cake. Beautiful. Thanks, Diana. Appreciate you. Thanks for your service.
Thanks for having me. Morning.
Have a wonderful day. We have just a crazy, crazy week, but let's take a few minutes and we'll get our COVID update and what's the latest with the vaccines, especially with the professor coming up next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, want to go to, I call him the professor. I used to call him our professor, but he's a professor to a lot of people. But the professor, certainly. Professor of virology at Columbia University and the host of This Week in Virology, microbe.tv. You got to listen to it. Professor Vincent Raccaniello. Professor, how are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Good to be back.
Good to talk to you. I've noticed a theme of animal stories. I want to talk about the Russian trials in a second here, obviously. But I got to get this out first. So I got this headline, 500,000 sharks could be killed for a vaccine. Why are sharks involved in this story? You don't know about, 2 stumps in a row.
Sharks. What are they doing with sharks?
Sharks produce squalene, a natural oil made in their livers.
Adjuvant. So that would be an adjuvant that you add to vaccines, right, to make them so you get a better immune response. And squalene is a commonly used adjuvant. Now, the leading vaccines in the U.S. do not use squalene, but those in other countries might, and they're going to get it from sharks. There you go. That's the reason.
What's an adjuvant and what is squalene?
Squalene is a lipid, and an adjuvant is something you add to a vaccine so you get a better immune response. So when you get a vaccine in your arm, it hurts for a day or so, right? Mm-hmm. That's because you're making an immune response. Now, if vaccines are inactivated, right, they don't reproduce. They don't always make a great immune response. But if you add an adjuvant, these are chemicals that artificially stimulate the immune response, basically. Mm-hmm. And it alerts them to the fact that there's a vaccine there, and they respond better. And we have some adjuvants in vaccines in the U.S. In Europe, there are some adjuvants. And you can always tell because you get soreness for a little bit longer. So they work really well.
Wow. Yeah, amazing. How amazing how anyone could ever have figured that out, right? What do we use if not sharks and squalene? Why do we not use squalene?
There are all kinds of adjuvants you can use. Squalene is one of them. There are aluminum salts that are others that can be used, and a variety of chemicals. They're all found just kind of randomly. People try different things in animals and see what works better. And squalene is one of the ones that has been used. Squalene, it basically makes an emulsion. When you mix lipids with water, you get little droplets. They don't actually dissolve. It's called an emulsion. So squalene and water emulsion is commonly used in some vaccines, and it just stimulates your immune responses. So
interesting. We don't use that here.
I would think that you could synthesize it chemically, and you wouldn't have to get it from sharks. That seems to make sense.
Let me throw another one your way here. This is the Atlantic horseshoe crab. Does this ring a bell or no? Okay, so the Atlantic horseshoe crab has a milky blue blood.
Yeah.
Each year, millions of crabs are captured, bled, and released. And the blood is used in almost all pharmaceutical vaccines, one of which being potentially the COVID-19. What is this?
Horseshoe crab blood. I've never heard of that one. I know that there's some uses of all right, so limulus lysate is a thing that you get from horseshoe crabs, and it can detect whether you've got toxic contaminants in your vaccines or not. So I think that's what they're using that for.
So it's to test the vaccine.
Yeah.
Itself. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to read more in that article because that is a bizarre scene. You mentioned inactivity a second ago, and I remember reading an article about the cold chain that's necessary to potentially distribute this, which is wild because I know you've talked a lot about, yes, let's say we make this thing and it works and it's safe. You still got to make it. And then I read this whole article about the potential difficulties of even distributing it because it's got to be kept at a precise temperature. What are the challenges there?
Oh, so cold chain is really a problem for most vaccines because you have to either keep them frozen or really, really cold, like minus 130 Celsius, really cold.
Really?
So
wow.
Some of these mRNA vaccines have to be kept very, very cold, and that's technically it's a problem because not everyone has these freezers. You have a regular freezer in your doctor's office, which is like minus 20 Celsius, right? And that's what many of the vaccines have to be kept at. Otherwise, they lose potency. But some of them have to be even kept at lower temperatures. And so everyone's going to have these freezers. And if you don't have them, the vaccine loses potency and it doesn't work.
Whoa. Wow. What do you know about the vaccines that are on trial now, and if they need cold chain or not?
They all need to be frozen, as far as I know. The only ones that might not need really low temperatures would be DNA vaccines, because they're just a piece of DNA in a buffer. But all the other ones have to be frozen. Although I'll tell you, I would say in 5 to 10 years, we won't need to freeze vaccines anymore. We have other technologies coming down the road, which will make vaccines last a really long time at room temperature.
Wow.
But for now,
That'd
we
be
still
amazing. And because I'm not even thinking about COVID, but I'm thinking about getting a polio vaccine into the middle of Africa, like the challenges of that.
You know what they did? The WHO developed freezers that worked with kerosene, so they didn't have to be plugged in.
Wow, that seems
scarcity of electricity, right? Yeah.
Sure. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, but that's still in our issue. That's going to be a problem because we've talked about just getting out 1 billion vaccines is hard enough, but now it has to be 1 billion vaccines in a cold chain. Jeez.
Yeah, and you need at least 1 billion syringes, right? I mean, it's all logistics. It's really a big problem.
Yeah,
it's not just a matter of proving it and boom, it's all done.
Yeah. Okay. What do you have, Professor? What's noteworthy? We need to know.
So what I've been thinking about, we still have 50,000 cases a week in the U.S. We have almost 1,000 deaths. The cases in New York have gone up in the past week. And I think this is really important. A study came out of the CDC between June and August of this year. Most of the cases were in people 20 to 30 years old. All right. And, before that, we had more cases in older people. But now the age has gone down. And part of that is because older people are sheltering, right? They know they're at big risk, whereas younger people are not. So younger people are antsy. They want to go out and go to restaurants and bars and so forth. And so they're getting infected more. And they can get sick. They can get very sick. So I think they're serving as the main transmitters now. The younger people, they believe they're invincible, of course, but they really need to be careful because they can potentially infect an older person, and then that's a big problem. So 20 to 30 years old is what is transmitting most of the SARS-CoV-2 right now.
You talked on your podcast the other day about this Russian vaccine.
Right.
What do we need to know about that?
So the Russian vaccine, they did a phase 1-2 trial, right? So phase 1 is for safety. A phase 2 is to see if when you inject it into people, it gives you antibodies and T cells. Remember those, Mike? Antibodies and T cells?
Yes.
Right? And, I'm thinking of starting a little quiz with you next time. What do you think of that? We'll see how you
think I can. Listen, I'll do as well as I did in college. So
you'll be better.
A solid B- is what I think I'll get.
You've been listening to me for a long time, so I'm sure you're absorbing things. Right?
It was fun. I remember I chuckled the other day when you said something that was the exact opposite of what you meant to say. And I paused for a second, and I was like, wait, I think that's wrong.
No, I'm very proud of that. Anyway, the Russian vaccine, they did a phase 1-2, and the results were published in a journal. Okay, so they're peer-reviewed, Lancet, and they all look pretty good. The only problem is there are only 76 people that were used in this trial. And usually, a phase 1, we would have 30 to 40 people, but then phase 2, a few hundred. So they're a little bit shorter. And I don't know why they had so few people, because there are plenty of people over there. But all the results look good to me, all right? They have 2 vaccines. They're going to give you one, and then a couple weeks later, they're going to give you a second. Prime boost, that's called. And the safety looked good. And the immunogenicity looked good. So the only criticism I have is that not enough people were tested.
Well, I remember we talked a couple weeks ago about some vaccine trial here where didn't they do it to like 30,000 people was the number? And I remember we talked about they did some immune deficient people and some younger people. And
so phase 3, you have to have a lot of people. And that's the other deficiency with the Russian trial. They mostly had healthy white men in this trial, youngish. So that's not good because you have to hit all the people that you hope to give the vaccine to. Yeah.
Would you / the CDC be okay with a vaccine from Russia or other countries? Like, is there a country that you'd be like, I don't know if we need that vaccine. I don't trust that. Or does it all go through the same kind of process?
Well, if you want to use a vaccine made outside the U.S., it has to be tested here for the most part, because people are different. and you don't know how they're going to react. And so I think most pharmaceuticals, if they're made overseas, we can approve them, but they have to be tested here, and often that's not feasible. But we would not just take this Russian or Chinese vaccine without having some tests in the U.S., in my opinion.
Okay. Well, how long would that test process take?
Oh, it would probably take some months, right? You would like to know efficacy, and that always takes a long time, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Professor, wonderful to talk to you as always. Microbe.tv. Everyone check out the podcast, Microbe.tv. It's This Week in Virology. Thanks, Professor. We'll talk next week.
Okay, bye-bye. Good week.
Thanks, sir. Have a great day. And I'll do more. I got to do some more research on Atlantic horseshoe crab's milky blue blood. Can you guys see the... You see, look at the blue blood. Those are jars of, they're draining the blood off of horseshoe crabs, and it's blue. What in the world? Anyway, have a great day, everyone. See you tomorrow. Oh, pre-debate coverage, obviously, all day tomorrow. Spread the word.